Soulja Boy is broke, and it's worse than almost anyone realizes. Right now, he's renting houses and doesn't even have something he can call home. He's testified under oath that he doesn't have health insurance, and the royalties to Crank That, the song that turned a 14-year-old kid in Mississippi into a Billboard No. 1 artist, are currently being shopped to the highest bidder in a court filing because he can't pay off a $4 million judgment against him. But how did the guy who was at his peak just a few years ago have such a heavy downfall? To understand this, you need to know how it all escalated to this point. DeAndre was born on July 28, 1990, in Chicago. When he was 6, his parents split and he moved down to Atlanta with his mom and his little brother. And by his own account, it wasn't easy. He's talked about being flat broke as a kid, going to school with nothing to do after, watching his grades slip once music got his hooks in him. He'd later say he used to be a straight A student before rap took over. At 14, his dad moved him to Batesville, Mississippi. And this is the part of the story that actually matters, because his father set him up with a home recording studio. That studio is where the entire Soulja Boy story begins. His uncle handed him a bootleg copy of FL Studio, and DeAndre started making beats, teaching himself the entire process from scratch in a small town most of the country had never heard of. In November 2005, he posted songs on a site called SoundClick. People liked what they heard, so he jumped onto YouTube and MySpace, which in 2005 and 2006 was basically the entire internet for a teenager trying to get noticed. He was doing something almost nobody in the music industry understood yet, using the internet itself as a direct line to fans. No label, no radio, no middleman. In March 2007, he recorded Crank That and dropped it on his own independent album, unsigned and still major, Da album before Da album. A few weeks later, he shot a low-budget video for the song, teaching the world the Superman dance. By the end of May 2007, the song was getting radio play. He caught the attention of producer Mr. Collarpark, signed with Interscope Records, and by September 1st, 2007, Crank That hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It stayed there for 7 non-consecutive weeks. He was 17 years old. The song got a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Song that year. He lost to Kanye West and T-Pain, but by then, it didn't matter. Crank That had already become the first song in history to sell 3 million digital copies. His major label debut, SouljaBoyTellHim.com, went platinum. By 2010, Forbes had him on their hip-hop Cash Kings list, reporting around $7 million in earnings that single year. For a kid who'd been broke in Atlanta a few years earlier, this was as fast a rise as hip-hop had ever seen. And this is where the story usually turns, because almost immediately, the cracks started showing. In 2011, Soulja Boy told everyone he'd bought a $55 million private jet. It wasn't true. His own team later had to walk it back. But underneath the bragging, actual money problems were already piling up. That same year, the state of California filed a tax lien against him for over $26,000. And that came right after he'd just finished clearing a separate $3,571 lien back in Mississippi. His Georgia home had already been foreclosed on the year before that. This is a pattern that's going to repeat itself over and over across the next 15 years of his life. The public persona spending like a mogul, while the private financial reality tells a completely different story. Even at his commercial peak, with millions coming in from touring, endorsements, and record sales, the bookkeeping behind the scenes was already a mess. For the next several years, Soulja Boy kept working, touring, releasing music, building a following that would eventually become one of the biggest YouTube followings of any rapper of his generation. Millions of subscribers and over 1 billion combined views by his own account. But that stretch between his early 20s and his late 20s also came loaded with arrests, minor lawsuits, and a handful of probation violations that chipped away at his income and his endorsement opportunities right when he needed them most to cover the lifestyle he was still presenting to the public. Big mansions in California and Georgia, a fleet of cars, jewelry, all of it kept getting acquired, and none of it was actually making him money. It was just costing him more than it brought in. He kept chasing side businesses that didn't pan out, and starting in the late 2000s, his personal life started generating way more headlines than his music did. In December 2018, Soulja Boy launched his own line of gaming consoles, the Soulja Game Handheld and the Soulja Game Fuse, selling them through his own online store for anywhere from about $100 to $400. He claimed they had thousands of built-in games. What they actually were, according to reporting at the time, were emulator boxes running pirated Nintendo, Sega, and PlayStation titles, without a single license secured, and customers who bought them found the systems glitchy and poorly built on top of that. This wasn't even his first attempt at building a knockoff tech empire either. His online store was already selling a Soulja phone, a Soulja watch, Soulja headphones, and self-branded earbuds called Soulja Pods, all of them cheap imitations of Apple products. When people online started calling out the consoles specifically, Soulja doubled down hard, tweeting that Nintendo ain't gonna do shit and that he'd already sold 5 million units. Nintendo, a company that has spent decades aggressively defending its copyright, did not find that funny. Within weeks, facing a threat over the Trademark Counterfeiting Act, Soulja pulled every console from his site and quietly deleted the tweets. He never actually got sued because he folded before it got that far, but the damage to his credibility as a legitimate businessman was already done, and somehow, this wasn't even the last time he tried this exact move. We'll get back to that. Around this same period, Soulja Boy's personal relationships were about to blow up into a series of legal battles that would define the next decade of his life and ultimately cost him more money than any bad business deal ever could. In February 2019, according to a lawsuit later filed by his ex-girlfriend Kayla Myers, Soulja Boy held a gun to her head and threatened her life during an incident at his home. Myers filed suit in 2020 for assault, battery, and false imprisonment, along with the kidnapping claim. A jury found him liable, and he was ordered to pay her roughly $471,000, later revisited and confirmed at around $472,000 once punitive damages were factored back in. He didn't appeal that one, he just quietly ate the loss. Around the same window of time, a different and far more serious situation was developing. A woman who'd started working for Soulja Boy in December 2018 as his personal assistant, later identified in court only as Jane Doe, alleged that weeks into the job he began sending her explicit, unsolicited photos, and that a romantic relationship developed that quickly turned violent and abusive. In her lawsuit, filed in January 2021, she claimed he punched her hard enough to knock her unconscious, that he locked her in a room without hot water for 3 days straight, and that the abuse continued until December 2020. Meanwhile, a third accuser entered the picture. Nia Riley, an ex-girlfriend and model who appeared alongside Soulja on Love and Hip Hop Hollywood and Marriage Boot Camp, said in a 2021 interview that he'd once threatened her with a gun and kicked her in the stomach while she was pregnant, causing a miscarriage. That case was still pending, with no trial date as of 2025. By the summer of 2023, all of this legal exposure had caught up with him financially, in a very public and very embarrassing way. During post-trial proceedings in the Kayla Myers case, Soulja Boy's finances got dragged into open court, and what came out was rough. He admitted he was carrying a $1 million tax lien with the IRS. His lawyer told the court he didn't even own the home he was living in. He was leasing it for $25,000 a month. His liquid assets amounted to 3 cars worth about $600,000 combined, $18,000 in jewelry, and $50,000 in stock. And his own attorney argued he couldn't sell any of it because the cars and jewelry were, quote, tools of his trade, essential to maintaining his image as a working entertainer. The judge in that case went so far as to state on the record that Way's net worth was negative. And then the judge said something that stuck around ever since, basically telling him that money had to be coming from somewhere because nobody pays $300,000 a year in rent while claiming to have nothing. The court didn't buy the Broke Act entirely, but it also confirmed the tax debt and the lien were very real. If you're keeping score, that's a rapper with a platinum song still played on the radio nearly 2 decades later, sitting in a California courtroom admitting he doesn't own his own house. Then came April 2025, and this is the moment that arguably did more damage to Soulja Boy's finances than everything before it combined. The Jane Doe case, the former assistant, finally went to trial in Santa Monica. Over the course of a month-long trial, the jury heard her testify about being confined, about the alleged assaults, about years of abuse she said started as a working relationship and spiraled into something far darker. Soulja Boy denied all of it. He admitted a relationship existed but claimed, among other things, that he'd hired her to roll blunts for him, and that since the district attorney never criminally charged him, none of it should count against him in civil court. The jury didn't see it that way. On April 10, 2025, they found him liable for sexual battery, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, gender violence, and failure to pay wages. Though they cleared him on false imprisonment and hostile work environment, the compensatory damages alone came to just over $4 million. Later that same day, in the punitive damages phase, Soulja Boy took the stand again to talk about his money and testified he was paying $25,000 a month for his rented mansion and owned 5 cars including a Lamborghini. When his own attorney asked if he was worth $100 million, a claim he'd made in the past, he reportedly just laughed and said, "Damn." He also told the court under oath that he doesn't have health insurance. The jury tacked on another $250,000 in punitive damages, bringing the total to $4.25 million. Outside the courthouse, Soulja Boy told cameras the trial was an unequal playing field, that his accuser got to hide behind a Jane Doe designation while he faced total public exposure, and he vowed to appeal. That appeal is apparently still working its way through the system because as of mid-2026, he hasn't paid. And here's where the story gets almost impossible to script, better than reality already has, because for the past year, this debt hasn't just sat there, it's been actively hunting down every income stream Soulja Boy has left. In June 2026, Jane Doe's legal team filed notice that they intend to sell off Soulja Boy's BMI royalties, meaning the money, crank, that generates every time it plays on the radio, in a movie, on TV, in a bar, anywhere it's publicly performed, to the highest bidder. Not the master recording, Interscope still owns that, but the ongoing income stream from public performance royalties. During the same trial, Soulja was actually asked how much he'd made off Crank That over the years, and whether it was true, he'd claimed $15 to $20 million from the track at some point. He said he wasn't sure. He said he didn't even know his own royalty percentage. Think about that for a second. The song that built his entire career, and he couldn't tell a courtroom what cut of it he actually gets. By July 1st, 2026, TMZ reported the debt had grown to about $4.2 million and was racking up roughly $1,165 a day in interest, just sitting there, compounding, while the case to sell off his royalties moves forward in the background. And weirdly, he's not even the only one in his orbit going through this exact thing right now. Around the same time, a court ordered rapper Blueface's own music royalties redirected straight to Jacqueline Martinez, who happens to be the mother of Soulja Boy's child, to settle a defamation judgment a Blueface owed her. So somehow, in the summer of 2026, Soulja Boy is simultaneously watching his own royalties get auctioned off by one woman, while his baby's mother collects another rapper's royalties, a few court dockets down the hall. And the relationship between Soulja and Jacqueline hasn't exactly been smooth either. Court documents from June 2026 revealed he'd emailed her attorney a 2-word message. That was just profanity, and she's since claimed he blocked her entirely. On top of the legal bleeding, 2025 gave the world a good look at just how unstable things had gotten publicly. In October, he got into an online back and forth with Kandi Burruss after she interviewed a former cameraman who accused Soulja of spitting in his food back in 2007, and Soulja fired off threats to sue both of them before walking it back with an apology. Then on November 4th, 2025, during what was supposed to be a lighthearted TikTok livestream game with a few smaller creators, Soulja Boy fell behind in the token count, got called out for it, and completely unraveled on camera, threatening to shoot one of the streamers in the face over what amounted to a $5,000 bet. The creators didn't even flinch. They laughed at him and kept playing, and Soulja ended the stream by counting cash on camera like nothing happened. It's a strange kind of moment, a multi-platinum artist losing his composure that badly over a TikTok token game in front of thousands of people, while a $4 million judgment sits over his head in the background. And even the business instincts that once made him a genuine internet pioneer haven't learned much from the Soulja game disaster back in 2018. Reporting from late 2025 showed Soulja Boy putting out yet another handheld gaming device, one that gamers and outlets immediately pointed out looked almost identical to an existing product from a company called Retroid, who publicly stated they had zero licensing relationship with him whatsoever. Same story, different console, same pattern of cutting corners and hoping nobody with the legal team notices. So where does that leave him right now, at 35 years old, a few days shy of 36? Around the time of the TikTok meltdown, Soulja had bragged that he'd pulled in almost $28,000 in a single year just from going live on the app, which sounds like a lot until you remember the debt clock ticking in the background is adding more than that every single month in interest alone. Some outlets have floated a net worth figure around $2 million for 2026, but that number is genuinely hard to trust. It's coming from celebrity net worth aggregator sites, not from anything verified in court, and it directly contradicts the negative net worth finding a judge put on the record just a few years earlier. What we do know for certain, because it's sitting in actual court filings and sworn testimony, is that he doesn't own his home, he doesn't have health insurance, he's carrying a 7-figure tax debt, and the royalties to the song that made him a household name are currently up for sale to pay off a woman who accused him of holding her captive. It's a strange kind of full circle moment when you think about it. This is a guy who, back in 2007, was one of the first artists in the world to figure out that you didn't need a label or a radio program director to become famous. All you needed was a webcam, a MySpace page, and a catchy enough dance. That instinct made him rich as a teenager, but that same instinct, the constant hustle, the willingness to throw something out into the world and deal with the consequences later, is arguably the exact same thing that's kept landing him back in courtrooms and back in debt for the better part of 2 decades. The knockoff consoles, the reckless spending, the volatile relationships that turned into 6- and 7-figure judgments. None of it happened because the opportunities dried up. If anything, he's had more chances than most artists ever get. It just never seems to translate into anything that sticks. The appeal on the $4 million judgment is still pending. Nobody knows yet whether it'll actually get overturned, reduced, or upheld completely. Nobody knows if the royalty sale goes through or whether Soulja finds a way to settle before it does. What we do know is that the interest clock on that debt is still running. Right now, today, adding up by the thousands every single day he doesn't pay. For a guy who was 17 years old and sitting at #1 on the Billboard charts, who basically wrote the blueprint every viral internet artist since has followed, that's a rough place to be standing at 35. And if you stuck until the end, you'll probably also want to see these videos on your screen next. Have a good one.